When I was sharing a presentation for the 50 young men between 16 and 17 years old on their retreat week, they were learning about self-awareness, relationships, manhood, coming of age. And when I asked a simple question, how many of you are close with your dads that you feel you can open up and share how you're feeling, what's really going on for you in your life? The response was overwhelmingly sad, with only one student raising his hand in a room of 50. Now, when I asked the question, why do you think that is? One of the students raised his hand and he said, hey guys, thanks for tuning into this video. My name's Shay Ryan Douglas, and I'm really excited to share this video because I just wanted to unpack the presentation that I recently shared at a local school with all the year 11 students. I've been going back to the school for the last 4 years now and been presenting this talk, which is ultimately aimed at being a conversation. What I've noticed in the 4 years is that these young men who are roughly around 16 to 17 years old, they actually don't respond that well to me teaching them things through a presentation. But instead, what I've learned is to ultimately connect with them on a real level, where I just ultimately share some stories about my life and my experience. And although my life may be unique to some, I was featured in a Netflix documentary, I've gone and traveled the world, I've spoken on multiple stages, and really, for many it might seem like quite a unique sort of life, but ultimately we're all unique in our own way. But there are many overlap similarities, and human behavior has these patterns. And so ultimately, in a way that I can connect with these students, I was able to really invite them into a conversation where we can actually discuss some of these topics around sexuality, around coming of age, around pornography and media, which aren't ultimately often discussed in our normal conversations, and very rarely even discussed in intimate conversations. Because as I asked them, I remember when I asked them the question, how many of you young men in this room are close with your dads? And honestly can say that you can have a relationship where you can share what's really going on in your heart. Only one of them raised their hands. And that really kind of upset me in a small way, but it also added fuel to my fire to be able to share this conversation more. It inspired me to actually take more action, to be a leading example for the next generation, to invite them into a conversation when the timing is right. And I feel by the age of 16 and 17 years old, most young men who are preparing to leave schools, maybe finalizing their exams, getting ready to finish up with all of the smaller responsibilities that they have, and ready to embark on a new adventure of life, whether it be going and seeing, furthering their education, or getting a new job, or going on a travel trip overseas, or even embarking on a new relationship with a human being. I feel it's very relevant to have conversations around the significance of the role that men play. And obviously this is all about manhood, and I just wanted to highlight and add a disclaimer that I am a man, so I don't feel that I'm qualified enough to speak to the woman's perspective. But although this is aimed at young men, it also can benefit females, or a feminine perspective, and listening in to realize, some of the challenges that men are faced with in today's world. And obviously, we're faced with a lot of challenges. And so ultimately what I want to unpack for you today, guys, is this conversation that I had with this young man, some of the revelations that came to me, and kind of a little bit of a design of a structure that I was able to have this conversation, so that maybe perhaps it inspires you to have these conversations with your dad, or your son, or your cousin, or nephew, or uncle, or those who you feel this is most relevant for. Because ultimately, we are all human beings on this journey, and we're all learning and growing, and seeking to find those inner questions and to resolve those inner conflicts that may or may not be there. But we can equip ourselves while we feel abundant and whole, and feel good in the moment, so that when tough times do come, we can be prepared, and we can anticipate a shift in our perspective, so that if and very likely when challenges do arise, we have have equipped ourselves with the tools to be able to navigate those tough times. So I guess how this presentation begins is with the students watching the day before the movie on Netflix called Liberated. And many of you who know me will know and have watched Liberated, the new sexual revolution, which is featured on Netflix from Magic Lantern Pictures Productions. And it was created back in 2013 when I was filmed at spring break in Panama City Beach. So for those who don't know me, just add a little background. I am from Australia, but I flew over to the United States and lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was on a soccer scholarship, actually really grateful and passionate soccer player. And so when I had my spring break opportunity, me and a bunch of guys, we traveled down to Panama City Beach in Florida for one of the biggest parties in the world. And we had a great time. We were going wild. We were literally unhooked, uncharted, wild little young boys. And this was all captured by a film crew, which they later released a documentary in 2018 in February called Liberated. And it really opens up the discussion around these topics of, hookup culture, one night stands, then explores how social media and other medias and pornography and the internet really impact this culture, which is normalizing hypersexual activities, which later potentially can lead to, when this is normal, horrific acts, which the movie ends. And I'm not going to give away the spoiler. I recommend to go and watch it because, ultimately there's this connecting thread between the film, and really seeing it from that perspective that, my choices and behaviors are impacting the world around me, and realizing that it's up to me to make the choices of healthy behaviors and patterns that I can, really make a difference in the world, and noticing that every choice that I make is impacting myself and others in every moment. And so I ultimately have the intention to go and speak to these young men just to raise the conversation, raise the topics, explore and allow them to come up with their own conclusions based on my story, based on my history, but for them to be empowered within themselves to make choices as they grow and they're presented with these challenges throughout their lives, that they can really learn from a moment of self-inquiry and self-reflection, and have a perspective to see that, this is one person's story, and I can choose to create a new story for myself. And so it was really interesting because in this presentation, I really focus on with these young men, the difference between a boy and a man, and that there are, these are very kind of distinguished psychological patterns, as well as behavioral patterns, and as well as not just physical choices or embodiments, but emotional and intellectual and sexual. And so, really unpack this with the students, where it becomes ultimately very obvious, like, for example, we know the difference between a boy physically is that he's smaller and, his voice hasn't broken, and so forth, whereas with the men, it's big and strong and mature, and and sometimes just physically built in a different way. And so we really just start to unpack some of these notions and go into more depth, psychologically, difference between a boy being very needy and dependent, and seeing life is happening to him, as opposed to a man who is independent and very giving and of service, and sees as things happening for him. So we're really highlighting these kind of differences between boys and men, and particularly in the behavioral patterns, because what I shared with them from the film as an example, I'm a man in that film. I was 20 years old in college in the United States, yet I was still behaving like a boy, where I was needing attention, needing acceptance, needing approval, trying to put myself out there, inflated by my own ego, and trying to accentuate this kind of machoism, where to my detriment, I was able to get what I wanted, but it was at a perspective of consuming and taking, and to the detriment of others, because obviously over time that is very unsustainable. And what I realized in exploring, the psychological patterns that I was going through, was very much in my ego, and stuck in this way of relating that was very limited, because it was like I was always trying to get something met. So that's from a place of not having. It's coming from a place of lacking. It's coming from a missing link or a hole in my body, in my being, in my psyche, that I don't have enough, or that I need to prove something, meaning that I am not proven already. So as we started to unpack this with the students, I found, and I was really curious, because I ultimately, I'm sharing this from my perspective, but the presentation is not about me. Presentation is about the students. It's about engaging them in the conversation. I was blown away, because this year the group was phenomenal, and they were really open-hearted, they were really honest, they were really engaged in the conversation, and they had some amazing feedback. And when I asked a simple question, I said, how many of you are close with your dads, that you feel you can really start to open up, have a conversation about your feelings, and really share what's going on for you in your life? I mean, it was just overwhelmingly, I was a bit shocked. I had braced myself for this, but it was like, it really caught me off guard, because only one man, young man, raised his hand in the entire room of 50 students. And so I continued, and I took note of that. And I continued to share the presentation, about some of the challenges that we may face as we mature and grow older, and, the relevance of being able to have intelligence around sharing and expressing what's really going on, and sharing our emotions. And so that's when I asked, why do you students think that is the case? And I was blown away with the response, because many students raised their hand, but this one student put his hand up nice and high, and he said, I believe that men feel afraid that if they share their emotions, they're going to be judged. I'll just repeat that. He said, I believe men feel afraid that if they share their emotions, they will be judged. And I'm just curious, if you're listening into this, if you also believe that this is to be, a deep-seated belief that a lot of men have, even if you're a woman, if you know a man that has this belief that they can't share their emotions in a fear of being judged. And it's really interesting, because as I continued the conversation, I then went on, and I asked, how many of you young men would love to have a relationship with your father, with your dad? After only one man put his hand up to say he could have an honest relationship with his father, every single bloke in the room, including the teachers, raised their hand and said, I would love to have a close relationship with my dad. And so that really inspired me to realize that, yes, we all do. Ultimately, we are all a child to someone. The only reason we're here is because a man and a woman came together, had intimacy, and birthed your life, birthed our lives. And so, of course, there is, significance around this relationship between a child and their father, boy or girl, man or woman. But again, there's what we highlighted in the presentation, the distinguishing difference between a boy and a man. And so, particularly in relation to their father, the primary he at that point. And I remember, and what my kind of approach was with these young men was to inspire them to step up and take leadership, and ultimately responsibility, that piece of being able to respond to their environment with a perspective through the lens of being a man, and calling them up to step up into manhood and make wise decisions based on distinguishing these key points. And so ultimately, I was able to establish a common ground with these young men, and they were able to really drop in to appreciate that relationship that we all have to ourselves, and then also to others, particularly in this point, our fathers, right? So we established that all the men wanted to have a relationship with their fathers that was close, trustworthy, and connected. But they all agreed that they hadn't actually established that in their lives yet. And so we then went on to discuss what are some approaches and ways that we could really cultivate this relationship that we all agreed we were yearning for. And I shared this one story which I want to share with you right now, which is beautiful and it's quite hilarious. But it's when this young man realized that he was also in this same kind of position, and he had really yearned for a connection with his dad, who had raised him and cared for him and looked after him. And so he had moved on with his life and gone off to study and lived in another city. And he had this realization one day, and he just thought, wow, I need to ring my dad to tell him something. And so he went over to the telephone, he grabbed the phone, he dialed in his dad's number, called him up, and his dad answered. His dad answered the phone. He said, "Hey, son, hello? Who's there?" And the son said, "Hey, Dad, it's me." And the dad said, "Oh, one moment, I'll just go and grab your mother." And the boy was a bit confused, and he looks over and he says to his dad, he just said, "No, Dad, it's you. I'd like to speak with you. I have something that I really need to share." And the dad kind of was quiet for a moment, and he stood there and he thought, "Oh, well, is everything okay? Do you need some money or something?" And the boy kind of laughed, but he said, "Oh, look, Dad, I just wanted to tell you something. This is really hard for me, but I just wanted to express, I don't need money. And, well, I just wanted to say that I've really been thinking a lot recently. I've been thinking about how much you've done for me. You've given me a house, you've driven me to school, you've worked to be able to put food on the table and help me through my education. You've shown up at my graduation. You've been there for me. You've helped me to coach my team or come to my game nights. You've done so much for me. And really, my life is going great now, and I've got lots going for me. And I just realized that I've never really said this, but I just want to say thank you." And there's a bit of silence on the other end, of course, but the father says nothing, and he's thinking for a while. And the son butts in and he says, "That's why I'm ringing you, Dad. I just want to say thank you, and I love you." There's a long pause on the line. The dad says, "Son, have you been drinking? What's going on?" And so it's a funny joke, and normally when I tell that story with the students, they all have a good laugh, and it's good crack. But ultimately, the thing is, sometimes we don't realize it, but although we are a child to someone, and we do have a father and we all have a mother, whether they be alive, dead, actively engaged or not, they have brought us into this world. And that is something that we can all be grateful for, to have this life, and to realize that as a man, as a grown man, or even a woman, there's so much still to be grateful for this gift of life that we have. And actually to open up and shift our perspective to a more mature approach to being responsible for ourselves, that we can have at least some level of appreciation and gratitude for our fathers, and choose instead to stay in this perpetual cycle of victim, which is a boy mentality, that, oh, it's all happening to me and poor me, that I don't have all this stuff, or I haven't got a dad who was there, or I never had a dad who helped me, or I never had a dad who did, or da whatever the excuse is. That's a choice, and we can get stuck in that same cycle of a mentality that keeps us limited by that thinking, or we can choose to transcend that with our hearts and actually open up and express gratitude and appreciation for the man who brought us into this world, regardless of how much or how little they've done for us in our lives. And so that was the big take home that I shared with these young men. And I'm so grateful because every single one of them at the end of the presentation came up to me and shook my hand and said, "Thank you. I really appreciate this." And it's really added fuel to my fire. And I'm so excited to be able to share this, this work with more men moving forward and go to more schools all across Australia. Having traveled across the world with the production crew, we've been to London. We've also been across the United States, visiting many universities. And I'm so excited to share this further with more young men. So I really appreciate you guys tuning in for this video. If you like it, give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, let us know what you thought and what you're feeling, how things are going for you. Really appreciate it. Look forward to hearing from you soon. If you want to click the little bell icon, then you're going to get notified of more videos that I release about this topic very soon. So thanks very much, guys. Chat to you all soon. Bye for now.